All right, we're going to start chapter 9 today. We're just going to do a couple sections this week, 9:1, 9:2, and 9:3. We'll get those taken care of this week. We're going to go back to there, but I want to look at the objectives real quick for today that we're going to cover. We're not really going to go through the slides today. We're just going to kind of look at some problems like you're going to have to do. So we're going to learn the square root property today. How do we go about solving quadratics using that square root property? And then we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So those are really the three things that we have to do today. We went through the slides like we normally have, and they just make it way too confusing. So we're going to kind of go away from the slides today, which probably is good for you because then you don't have to watch these slides. But I've got a mask on today too, so you get to look at me in a mask. Just what you want to do. So the first objective is really just solving using the square root property. So essentially we're looking at solving something like k squared is equal to 16. How do we go about finding the value of k that works in this problem? Anytime you're using the square root property to solve, and you can get your k squared equal to something, we're really in good shape. Square root property, we talked about this in the last section. How do you get rid of squaring something? You take its square root. So we're going to take the square of both sides and then the square root of 16. The only difference is now when you're using the square root property is that our solutions are both going to be positive and negative. So the solution to this would be k is equal to plus or minus 4. Square root of 16 is 4. Okay. Let's look at another one. Let's go k squared is equal to 20. Okay, so again, we've got our k squared equal to something, so we're going to take the square root of both sides. So we take the square root of k squared, and we're going to take the square root of 20. So this is going to be k is equal to positive or negative square root of 20. But just like we worked in the last chapter, underneath radicals, we have to be able to simplify them. So 20 is 4 times 5. Square root of 4 is 2. So k then in this case is going to equal plus or minus 2 radical 5. And that's the type of question, that's really the first type of question that you can have with this, is solving them when you've got your k squared equal to something already. And the next example, let's say we have something like 4x squared minus 80 equals 0. Now we've got our k squared, or our x squared in this case, minus something equal to 0. Well, the first thing we're going to do with this then is we're going to go ahead and isolate kind of our square root. So I'm going to add 80 to both sides. So you get 4x squared equals 80. I'm going to divide both sides by 4 and end up with x squared equals 20. Now we're set up just like we were in the last examples. Got big ears. Like we were in the last examples, we're just going to take the square root of both sides, and it's 20, which we just dealt with. So then x would be equal to positive or negative 2 radical 5. Square root of both sides, we just did this with k and just made it x in this case and solved, and that's our solution. But it really does come down to we have to isolate first. That means getting your x squared or whatever on one side, everything else on the other side. So let's look at another example of this. Let's go 3x squared minus 42 equals 0. Okay. So we're going to add 42 to both sides. So 3x squared equals 42. Divide by 42, or I'm sorry, divide by 3. 42 divided by 3 is 14. Yep. Take the square root of both sides. Make sure you put plus or minus. We don't know the square root of 14. It can't be broken down. That's your solution, and you're done. Okay. So there's the second type of problems you're going to look at. You're going to be looking at isolating them. Next type of problem that you're going to look at is, they're going to kind of look like the first type that we did, but now we're going to have like x minus 3 squared equals 25. Okay. We've got something inside the parentheses. How we're going to go about doing this really doesn't change. But you got to remember, this is where you got to kind of remember that plus or minus thing that we have to do. So again, we've got x minus 3 squared equals 25. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. So if we take the square root of something squared, it just kind of cancels that out. So we're just left with x minus 3. And that's going to be the square root of 25. But remember, the square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. And that plus or minus 5 is important now because we're going to have two solutions to this. And it's not just going to be 5 and negative 5. It's going to be x minus 3 equals 5. That's your first solution. So you solve that and you get x is equal to 8. Or x minus 3 is going to equal negative 5. Add 3 to both sides and you get negative 2. So you get two solutions when you go in here. And if you look at it, 8 minus 3 is 5. 5 squared is 25. It works. Negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is 25. So you have to have two solutions when you do this. And again, back here, you've got two solutions. Positive square root of 14, negative square root of 14. You know, up here, positive 4 is one solution, negative 4 is one solution. So you still have two solutions for all of them. Now it's just you have to list them because it's not just positive or negative 5. Let's look at another one of these. Let's go 2x plus 1 equals squared equals 49. Okay, so we're going to take the square root of both sides. So 2x plus 1 is going to equal the square root of 49. Square root of 49 is plus or minus 7. So two solutions. 2x plus 1 equals 7, or 2x plus 1 equals negative 7. Subtract 1, divide by 2, x is equal to 3. Subtract 1, divide by 2, x is equal to negative 4. So two solutions for that one as well. And again, you can always check these to make sure that you are working out and it's like it needs to be. So that's the second type of problem. The next thing that we have to talk about then, or the next objective that we have to talk about, is what we call completing the square. So what happens if we have a problem like x squared plus 12x, and we want to complete the square? So I want this to say x plus something squared. We want to kind of complete this square. So we're going to add in here kind of this other box so that we can do what we call completing the square, so we could solve a problem that maybe looked like this. Because ultimately, when we're completing the square, this is what we're looking to do. We're looking to figure out what goes inside kind of those parentheses. And how we decide what goes in kind of this box right here. And we're filling this box in right here. So we're going to add something in to fill this box. This box is done by taking 1/2 of your b value and squaring it. Now remember, our a value, this is our a value right here, what's out front. This is our b value right here. This is, in a sense, our c value. So that's going to equal your c value when you're completing the square. Okay. So when we complete that square, if I do that in this case, that's going to be 1/2 of 12 squared. Half of 12 is 6. 6 squared is 36. So I'm going to put a 36 in there, in that box. That 36 completes the square. Well, if I'm going to factor that, I want to know what goes inside of that box as well, if we're going to factor it. Well, we could factor it by doing this right here. Put a 36 here and a 12 here and get 6 and 6. Or that box is going to be 1/2 of b. So that value right there is going to be a 6. And this is called completing the square. This part is completing the square. This part is kind of factoring it to help you out. So let's look at another one where we're going to complete the square. Let's go x squared minus 14x. And we're going to complete this square. So we're going to put something in here to complete the square. Our formula said it's 1/2 of b squared. So 1/2 of b, my b value is 14. 1/2 of b is 7. 7 squared is 49. 49 completes the square. If you were going to factor it, it's x, this symbol, and this symbol are going to be the same. To figure out what there, we said it was 1/2 of b, which was right here, which we just said was 7. Okay, so there are your solutions. Completing the square. Let's look at another one. Let's go x squared minus 60x. Go ahead and figure out what you would need to put in there to complete the square. Was really a nice number, wasn't it? 1/2 of 60. So 1/2 of 60 is 30. 30 squared is 900. So 900 would go in the box. If you're going to factor it, it'd be x minus 1/2 of 60, 30 squared. Okay, so 900 completes the box. 30 completes the square. Okay, so now, what can we do with this? How can we use this to help us solve a problem? Well, let's say that we have something like x squared plus 14x plus 10 equals 0. Let's go minus 10. Let's go minus 10. Let's go minus 10. And you're asked to solve this by completing the square. So we're going to be asked to solve this by completing the square. So first step, when you're solving an equation, now we've got an a, b, and a c value. The first thing you have to do when you're solving by completing the square is you are going to move the constant to the other side, your c value to the other side. Now we've got it, notice I've got an open spot. We're going to complete this square. So we're going to figure out what goes inside this box. So my b value is 14. 1/2 of 14 is 7. 7 squared is 49. So you notice how I've added 49 onto the left-hand side. I've kind of changed what the equation looks like a little bit. So that means I have to add 49 to the other side as well. So I have to put plus 49 over there as well. Now this can be factored. It's x. This is a plus sign. So plus 1/2 of 14 is 7. So that becomes x plus 7 squared, and this becomes 59. Now we're back to how we were with some of our questions before. Take the square root, plus or minus the square root of 59. Subtract 7 from both sides. So that's negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 59. And you're okay with leaving it in that form. There's nothing wrong with that form. This is how you evaluate or solve by completing the square. The first thing you do is move the constant to the other side of the equation. Figure out what you'd have to do to complete the square. Make sure you add that to both sides. because we got to keep that equation balanced. Factor it, and then solve after you factored it. Let's look at another one. Let's go x squared minus 18x plus 90 equals 0. We're going to solve this by completing the square. Okay, so step 1, we're going to move the 90 to the other side, so that's minus 90. It's okay. Now we're going to complete the square. So we'll change colors. The symbol, by the way, that's always going to be a plus, so we got to figure out what we have to put in the box. So we have to put it on both sides. Half of 18 is 9. 9 squared is 81. So we're going to add 81 to both sides. Factor this. X, that's a minus, so it's going to be minus. Half of 18 is 9. And this is going to give us negative 9. It's okay. Take the square root of both sides. So x minus 9 equals positive or negative the square root of negative 9. We talked about that in the last chapter with complex numbers. This is 3i, so that's plus or minus 3i. Move the 9 to the other side. So 9 plus or minus 3i is our x value for that. And it's okay that we get complex numbers. That's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Let's look at one more example of this, and then we'll go about getting your homework going with that. So let's go x squared minus 14x minus 4 equals 0. So solving, first thing we're going to do is move the number to the other side. So it's positive 4 this time. Figure out what we have to put in the box. It's going to be plus something. Half of 14 is 7. 7 squared is 49. So we're adding 49 again. Factored that, that's x minus half of 14 is 7 squared equals 53. Take the square roots. X minus 7 equals positive or negative radical 53, which we don't know. Add 7 to both sides, and you leave it in that form. Okay. So there is lesson 9.1. We're going to start out with the easy stuff. X squared equals 16. Finding your values. Next step we did was we isolated, and then followed, again, the previous steps. Okay. Then we did completing the square. Ones where we had it inside parentheses. Make sure when you do these, you get your 2 solutions. And then we finished up by completing the square, finding that box term that's in the box. Remember, we found that by doing a half of b squared. And then we factored it by going x and then whatever the symbol was for your b value, and then half of that squared. And then solve away and get the solutions that you have. Okay. So there's lesson 9.1. If you haven't taken the quiz yet from chapter 8, make sure you go back and get the chapter quiz done in chapter 8. We'll work on 9.2 tomorrow and 9.3 on Thursday. Have a good one, everybody.